Hello friends! Today's something a little bit different. A few weeks ago, my friend Jenn and I each found ourselves suckered in by the power of marketing. We each saw all over Twitter this book, The Lamplighters by Emma Stonex, and we were both captivated by the cover and the premise and the way it was being marketed and the fact that it looked so stunning, and yet I wasn't completely sold on it when I read the blurb. So Jenn, being very, very kind, bought herself the book and then also bought me a copy of the book for my birthday. I am someone who is very taken by lighthouses and stories that revolve around them. I'm a huge fan of the Irish animated film Song of the Sea. I loved the film The Lighthouse by the same director of The Witch. I love The Witch, one of my favourite films, and then The Lighthouse is also really good as well. And I even have a tattoo of a lighthouse, which you can't really see very well. That's it. I've got a tattoo of a lighthouse. Love lighthouses, really cool. And when I read the blurb of this, I was like, not so sure. But Jenn got it me for my birthday. And then Jenn and I met up a few days ago in Cambridge. We went out for sushi, we talked about the book. Now we've made a video together. So what's going to happen here is we're going to run down our pros and cons about The Lamplighters by Emma Stonex. Jenn's got her pros, then we'll do mine, then we'll do hers, then we'll do mine. Wait, Jenn's pros, Jenn's cons, my cons. Yeah, let's get on with it. First, what's it about? The Lamplighters is a novel by Emma Stonex. I think it's her debut novel. It begins in 1972 with 3 lighthouse keepers off the coast of Devon going missing. The man who sails his boat out to go fetch them finds them gone. And it's kind of a locked room mystery. He goes into the lighthouse. There is no trace of these 3 men. The room is locked, and the clocks have stopped at a specific time. So it's a really interesting locked room mystery. We're then flung 20 years into the future, 1992. An author who is made up for the book and is famous for writing ocean-related crime novels really wants to write a kind of fictionalized biography of this event, which has become really infamous over the last 20 years. And so he reaches out to the wives of 2 of the lighthouse keepers and the girlfriend of the 3rd to try to interview them and figure out what's going on. There's a really great mechanic here because we only see these interviews from the perspectives of the wives. They give us their personality, they give us their insight and their opinions on things, and the writer never actually says a word. You only get the women's responses to his questions, and it works really well to create this kind of rambling narrative from their perspectives. I loved it. The book then flits back and forth pretty methodically between 1972, the men on the lighthouse leading up to them going missing and getting their perspectives and their opinions and their personalities, and then to 1992 with the women talking to the author and also slowly sending each other messages talking about what's going on. That's your premise, and now here's Jenn with her pros about The Lamplighters by Emma Stonex. Over to you, Jenn.
Hey everyone, my name is Jenn, and I am honored to be doing this video with Will of Books and Bow. So Will and I read The Lamplighters by Emma Stonex together. A funny story about this, I had seen this around because it is a beautiful cover, it has sprayed edges, and I'm definitely into those things. I wasn't sure that the premise of the book really hooked me, but I kept hearing about how good it was. I saw how beautiful the book was. I'll ask Twitter what they think. And so I posted a poll on Twitter and I asked, should I buy this book because it's beautiful, even though I don't know if I'm going to be into it? And helpfully the poll was like 50-50, right? But Will commented and they said, oh, I'm in the same boat. It looks beautiful. I've heard it's good, but I don't really know if I'm going to be into it. So I said, you know what? I'm gonna buy it. And then it was Will's birthday, so I decided, we were in the same boat with this book. Same boat, get it, because it's about lighthouses and boats. So I will buy them the book for their birthday. Last week on Saturday, we met up in person, and we decided that before we met up, we were going to read this book so we could talk about it in person. And that's the thing that I love about book Twitter, is that it actually, I feel like sometimes it does bring people together over books, which is fantastic. So to start off with, I'm going to have 3 pros and 3 cons. My first pro, I don't think I can get away from this, the fact that it is a gorgeous book. And that is a pro, because in terms of the physicality of owning an actual book as opposed to reading it on an e-reader, listening to an audiobook, is that you have the physical product. And there is something nice about having a book in your hands, about just observing, its physical characteristics, its aesthetics. I mean, it's beautiful, kind of like, I don't know, like rock sediment or something. And then of course you've got the metallic details. And even the end papers, it's very subtle, but it's kind of like water, which is cool. So I would say that's a big pro for me, is just how gorgeous it looks. It's gonna look great on the shelf. The other pro is that, so the premise of the book is that these lamplighters, these men who work on lighthouses, they go missing. 20 years later, this writer decides to go kind of fishing around for the truth. He wants to write a book about it. Dredges up the past for these women that were either married or dating one of the men who went missing. These women meet up with this writer. The funny thing is that the writer is never actually really featured in the book. He's not a point of view character. The chapters where they're being interviewed by him is completely one-sided. We only hear from the women. The chapters are written very conversationally. It's like the whole thing is just a stream of dialogue and them describing things, and I really liked how natural that felt, and how it really captured the tone of the characters and their personalities, just through kind of their talk, just through the words they said and everything. So I thought that was a good pro for this. My third pro is that it's a mystery, right? And so you kind of want this whodunit feel. You want to have this feeling of suspense. You want to be hooked. You want to be led along the merry garden path, or whatever that phrase is. And I think this book does that. I was, wondering, are we going to find out what happened? And throughout the book, there's little things littered, oh, she knew this, or she had done that. And you're just kind of oh, what's happening? And it's also fun to kind of try to figure things out along the way. That is my third pro. So my pros are, it looks beautiful. The conversational chapters are really good, and I was hooked, and I wanted to know what happened, and that kept me kind of glued from beginning to end.
Wow! Thanks, Jen! Here are my pros, and I think they overlap with Jen's pros. I can't remember. I have already, at time of recording, watched and edited Jen's part of the video, but now I can't remember because it's the next day, and I have a bad brain. The first thing that caught my eye with this book is the narrative and the writing style. I really like the way that it is structured and written. The 1992 chapters focus on these wives and their lives and their perspectives on what happened. One wife has a very different attitude to another, and then the girlfriend, who has moved on and married someone else, has again a different perspective, and she is brought in a little bit later. And these different perspectives are okay, but what really grabbed me is the way that their chapters are written and the way that these women are described. One of the women, when she is first introduced, she has this very 1990s middle-aged housewife kind of an aesthetic. It really felt like I recognized this woman. I knew her so deeply and intensely. She's lonely, her husband died 20 years ago, and now she has the TV on all the time. She lives off the life insurance money that his company gave her, and she just sits and watches the TV, and she remarks how she likes more colourful TV shows and quiz shows and game shows because they're bright and vibrant and they keep her entertained. She willingly describes herself as a bit of a child who just needs a distraction, and I could relate to that. I know people like that. I understood this kind of a character. I really felt attached to that kind of description. It was very visceral in a quiet kind of a way. And the description of the lighthouse keepers themselves when we move back in time is also really gripping. You get different perspectives from the different lighthouse keepers, and those perspectives really help flesh them out, because you've basically got a single day being described from different people's points of views in a very cluttered and claustrophobic space, and so you get to see how they feel about each other, and their thoughts and feelings contradict and overlap because of perspective and claustrophobia. As I said, these things work really well to create a condensed space. At times it feels like it's on a stage, it feels like a play, a very, very close space. It is intimate and it is a little tense. And I think that the writing really lends itself to create that kind of tenseness. My other pro is that you never forget about the sea. I thought that this was a really, really good dramatic effect. All the way through the book, you are constantly reminded of the ocean. As you can see from the cover, you've got this sense of isolation and the ocean is all around and it almost looks supernatural. It is all-encompassing. And even in the future chapters, the women, the way they describe the ocean and their time living by the ocean, one of them still does, the other has moved to Bath because she couldn't stand the ocean. You're constantly reminded of the sea as a character, as a living creature, and it is very intense. So this is kind of linked to my first pro, which was about the writing. This one is about the atmosphere, which again is created by the writing. It is very intense, and you really get a sense of the ocean as a character and as a threat. And because this is a mystery and we don't know what happened to them, you do kind of wonder, did the sea do it? You almost ask that question of yourself because the sea becomes such a threatening character in and of itself. My third pro is with the pacing. This book is really fantastically paced. That, as I said, moving back and forth between the 70s and the 90s, back and forth, it works so well to create this really steady pace. It does not meander, it does not sway with the wind. This is a constantly moving pace. It has inertia, it has a rhythm to it. And that helps connect itself, as I say, to the sea. It helps us keep our place at all times. It really keeps you moving. This is a mystery to an extent. It's also kind of a character drama because these characters take center stage and you get to know them so intimately. So it really is a character drama. While the book is a mystery, whodunit, what happened to them kind of an affair, it is also very much a story of these characters, and because the pace keeps moving us from character to character, time to time, place to place, we are constantly learning more and more about what happened or didn't happen, but we are getting to know these characters in a very satisfying way, and we don't spend too much time with each character, we don't get bored, we don't get over or under familiar with them. The pacing is tight. Now, over to Jen for her cons. Hi, Jen.
Now, in terms of my cons, okay, just relating it back to the cover, I would say that this is kind of a lesson in not being lured in by the cover, because I don't think, like, tonally, the colors and just the imagery of this book just doesn't match, I feel like, the mood in the book. I feel like the book cover should have been maybe more muted grays and greens and just murkier colors as opposed to this very like striking imagery. But on the other hand, the marketing production department, like they were working hand in hand on this because I bought it because of how it looked. So in terms of selling books, it definitely worked. But then in terms of how I feel about it, I wasn't 100% super into it. Like I didn't really like it all that much. Like I think it's like a 3-star read for me. And so I feel like the hype of the book in terms of how it looks and the stuff that I was hearing about it didn't really match how I felt about the book after I read it. My second con is that even though, as I said, I was really hooked into wanting to know what happened, I felt like, so, you know, every good mystery novel I feel like needs a red herring or two, right? Like they need to lead people astray. And I'm not sure if you classify some of what is in this book as red herring, but whatever it was, the little nuggets of information that she kind of scattered throughout. It's not that they were red herrings really, or that they led you astray, but that they just ended up like not mattering that much. Like, as I said before, like the characters kind of hint at, oh, you know, these are my secrets or whatever. And you just kind of felt like at the end, wasn't really sure how impactful they were, or I wasn't sure that they were stitched together quite convincingly, so that on their own they were fine, but like as they related to each other and as related to the plot of the book, I wasn't really convinced by some of these devices that she used to kind of string you along, even though they worked in terms of like wanting me to get to the end, but they didn't really work in terms of like leaving me with a sense of cohesion and feeling satisfied with how it wrapped up. So I guess my third con, again, it's kind of like going back to impact. Like I didn't really feel like I understood the sense of loss of these men and the mystery. Maybe because it was so tightly focused on the 3 women and we didn't really get to see how it maybe impacted the community. I just felt like they left or they disappeared, and okay, like I just didn't feel like their disappearance, like obviously it matters, but it just didn't feel like it wasn't carried off very convincingly in my mind. And part of that maybe is expectations, because I didn't think that I'd be into it, but I wanted this book to kind of overcome my expectations and my reservations, and it really didn't. I wanted more from this book. And to be honest, I feel like it might have been a stronger book if it wasn't like trying to play up to this thriller side of a mystery. And actually, I don't know if this is a spoiler, but you do find out what happens. I kind of wish that I didn't. Like, I kind of wanted it to be a bit more open-ended and that, you know, the mystery lingers. But as it was, like, I just felt a lingering sense of as opposed to like, I wonder, you know? And I feel like it's not really gonna stay with me because of that. I didn't necessarily think it was unsatisfying, the ending, but I just kind of wasn't overall satisfied with it. Those are my pros and cons. As I said, overall, I liked it. I enjoyed it while I was reading it, but I would say it's a very solid 3 out of 5, and I will try to bear this in mind moving forward and try not to be taken in by beautiful covers and sprayed edges. Yes, let that be a lesson to you all. That's it for me. Signing off now.
Wow, what fantastic cons. Thanks so much for joining me today, Jen. You're welcome, Will. Hate myself. Here are my cons. One of Jen's cons was that there are a lot of red herrings in this book, and I 100% agree. This book, as it goes on, starts throwing you in weird directions. Towards the end of the book, and I'm not going to spoil anything, towards the end we are introduced to a very large, very alive red herring, and red herrings are fine. Mysteries are built on them. I understand that the story needs to twist and turn and keep you guessing and keep you on your toes. I appreciate that. But these red herrings are nothing but that, and they do create unanswered questions and threads that are left dangling by the end of the book, and I do not appreciate that. I felt like they didn't service the plot in any way. You can argue that this one big red herring did help expand one of the characters and his backstory, and that is absolutely true. But it could have been handled differently. It could have been done without creating this awkward loose thread that really didn't make sense by the end. Similarly to this, there is a potential supernatural bent to this book. As the isolation sets in, and again this reminded me of the movie The Lighthouse, as the tension amps up and the atmosphere grows and kind of absorbs the men on the lighthouse, you start to wonder if there is a supernatural element. This kind of goes unanswered. It remains vague all the way through, and I'm not sure how I feel about that vagueness. I quite like vagueness. I like David Lynch. I like this supernatural, potential, surrealist kind of attitude that writers and filmmakers like to adopt. I enjoy it. I just don't think it worked very well here, either because it didn't match the tone, the atmosphere, the story itself, or maybe because it wasn't particularly well executed by Emma Stonex. I'm not really sure. And another thing is that although I really like the characterization of the men on the lighthouse and their wives in the future, I think the characterization is one of the book's strongest points. There is a little bit of inconsistency with these characters. Two of the men on the lighthouse, when they are given room to talk, when it is their turn to talk, if you like, when we are given their perspective, a chapter that focuses on them in the first person talking about their life and their experiences, it doesn't actually match up. And although it's very clever, and I really appreciate it, and I could see it coming, the idea that one person doesn't see themselves the way other people see them, and so there are going to be contradictions between how a man perceives himself and how another man perceives him. I love that, that's great, but it doesn't really work here. These contradictions don't make sense. You'll definitely know what I mean when you read this. The idea is there that these are contradictions, but they don't make sense in practice. It's very difficult to describe. I would have to go into a lot of detail, and I'm not going to do that, but just keep an eye out. There are two men on the lighthouse. The third man is described in detail. He understands himself, he's true about himself, and his description of himself matches up with other people's descriptions of him. The other two men, their characterization is wonky and wobbly, and the contradictions do not help, and they don't make sense. And I feel like they actually weren't intentional either. almost like I'm giving the book too much credit for the idea of these contradictions in character. They actually might not have been intentional at all, and I'm reading too much into it. I'm not sure, but I would still call that a con. So there you have it. That was mine and Jen's buddy read of The Lamplighters by Emma Stonex. Overall, it is a really fun book. I recommend reading it. It definitely has some faults, especially as a mystery story. It trips over its own feet and it gets a little bit muddled, but the way that it's written, the pacing and the characterization and the atmosphere really do draw you in and keep you reading until the end. I think it is a worthwhile read. Jen gave it a star rating. I hate star ratings. I'm not going to do that. I think it's a worthwhile read. I don't think it'll blow you away and it's not an incredible murder mystery, but it is a really tight character drama, and the atmosphere and the environment of this claustrophobic lighthouse is enough of an exciting place to live in for a few hundred pages that I recommend it. Please let me know in the comments what your favourite setting is for books. This is something I'm thinking of doing a topic on for a video. I love settings, and sometimes I find that I won't read a book if I don't enjoy the setting. I mentioned in a previous video that I didn't enjoy The Secret History or Ninth House because I don't really like universities and academia as settings, but I do like lighthouses. And I love factories. I think factories are brilliant settings. Read Out by Natsuo Kirino. Anyway, tell me, what do you love when it comes to setting an atmosphere in a book? I'd love to know. And subscribe for books.